Okay. All right. I want to welcome everyone here tonight to this Sunday night before Passover for the First Samuel chapter 18, and we're going to be talking about David rising up and getting a little more and more popular within Israel. So let's go ahead and start with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in words of Torah. All right. Well, good to have everyone here with us tonight, and I hope everyone is staying healthy and not getting out and playing golf and stuff like that, because that's probably not a good thing to do right now. So let's go ahead and get going, and I think the others will probably jump in afterwards. All right, here's our little timeline, though, again, that kind of gives us an idea of how these characters overlap. And the one I wanted to look at tonight, though, was the one here with Jonathan, how he overlaps with David. You see here that Jonathan was born about 1071, and he was born about 1071 and David about 1041, give or take. So there's about 30 years difference between the ages of Jonathan and David. Okay, so that's something that just, until I started studying this stuff, I never realized that, because you always you think of it, or I always did as a kid growing up, that the story of David and Jonathan, they were just a couple of teenage boys, or late teens, early 20s, that just were buds, and they ran around together and toss the old football around a little bit, maybe kick a soccer ball back and forth, and did all sorts of crazy stuff together. And no, it wasn't so much so. If you remember the story, Jonathan was already a military commander and had fought the battle at Michmash about the same time as David was being born. So yeah, there is a big difference in between the ages of those two people. So anyway, and here is the chronology. You can go back at it and look at it later on, where these dates, where they come from, and so forth. And again, every time you get somebody that tries to put a chronology of David's life together, you're going to see some differences, because we just don't have a hard and fast thing there that dates that you can just write in concrete. So anyway, and so here's the one that I found last week, that this one is mushy enough. It tells the events, but it doesn't is just as you head this direction to where David dies. Well, those things kind of come together in a sort of a format, but they're not really something that, again, you can nail down. And that's just what we have to deal with, because we just don't know. All right, so chapter 18 has three basic themes, actually. It's just one of them is the friendship of David and Jonathan, and then the second part of it was basically the jealousy of Saul for David. I mean, he was just crazy jealous of David. And then the last part of it is where David marries Michal, the Saul's youngest daughter. and which that all of that kind of seems a little strange to me. That okay, he's jealous of David, but at the same time he's going to marry him off to his daughter. And I guess he thought that his daughter was going to be a spy for him or something. I don't know. And so we have to note that one of the things that we have to really remember about the book of Samuel is that it is not chronological at all. Now, some of the stories, they're not told in the exact order. We've already talked about that. Where David was anointed, and then he was asked to play the harp and sing for the king, for King Saul, and then he goes and kills Goliath. Whereas in the chapters 16, 17, you have David killing Goliath, and then he goes and plays in the court and so forth. So anyway, there's a few places where the chronology just isn't real nice and neat, and so uh, beginning with this verse 1, it says, "It came to pass when David had finished speaking to Saul, Jonathan's soul was knit to David's soul, and Jonathan loved him as himself." All right. So it came to pass that when David had finished speaking about what? Well, a lot of the writers and commentators will say, well, what this is that um, this is coming on the heels of the the killing of Goliath, and where then, okay, David, Saul had promised that whoever killed Goliath could have um, daughter in marriage, and so he was asking, his staff, well, what's the story with this guy here? Um, David, and what's his family like? Because now, of course, David, he's looking at him to be a son-in-law. So, if you're going to have a son-in-law, you want to know a little bit more about who they are, what kind of car they drive, where they go to college, all of that kind of stuff. What is their what are their parents like, and so forth. So maybe that's what they had been talking about. We don't really know. But then it jumps right into, just doesn't seem like that there's not a real good segue there that says, okay, when David finished speaking to Saul, Jonathan's soul was knit to David's soul. So this really it didn't fit all that well in terms of, grammatically or I don't know what you call it, literarily, or whatever. You're writing a good story. It needed a little bit more of a lead in or something that would talk about Jonathan. But Jonathan's soul knit to David's soul. Now, um, there's some things here that we just don't know about with Jonathan and David, how this really worked, because remember, Jonathan was 30 years older than David was. All right, so that at this time, at the writing of this, we're looking at Jonathan being about 50 years old and David being about 20 years old. So they're not the two post-adolescent teenager kids going around and playing ball together and chasing giggly girls. No, it was a completely different relationship that transpired there. And so there's a lot of things that you can kind of read into those verses that right here. And one of them is that I think you can talk about the character of um, of Jonathan, and you know his just his attitude and so forth. He was the crown prince. He was going to become the king when his father passed away, and so and yet here he didn't seem all that um, concerned about David. That he was getting more and more popular. I mean, Saul was certainly getting his knickers in a knot on because of David, but Jonathan didn't really seem to care. Maybe he had seen enough of this that he did not want to be the king, and we just don't know. But I know that his character was such that he didn't. It didn't bother him that David was real popular and um, was coming um, coming up in the ranks, and everybody seemed to like him. And how would that be a threat to his father and so forth? So I think that when it says that his their souls were knit together, to what that tells me is that they both had the same ideas and aspirations for the state of Israel, that they wanted God to bless Israel. They wanted um, they wanted the same things. So they were not particularly interested in pursuing the idea of being a king of this or that and the other. That was less important to them than um, than the good of the country and the good of the people. And it's like that old saying that, I don't know, it's been attributed to all sorts of different people, where it says that it's just amazing what you can get done if you don't care who gets credit for it. And I think that was maybe a Dwight Eisenhower, and then later on stolen by uh, Ronald Reagan or somebody like that. And so it's just one of those kind of the things that these guys, they were going in for the good of the country, and that's what they were looking for. And so we see here that now there is one thing that I wanted to get into, and I'll do this, and then we'll get back. We'll get back to that. Okay, this relationship here. If you read about David and Jonathan enough, and you get on the internet and you start crawling around on the internet, you're going to find somebody's writing in there and giving the example of David and Jonathan as a sanctioned homosexual relationship, and it was not. Okay, it was definitely not, and for a variety of reasons. Um, let's look at one of them being the word that they use for love, that Jonathan loved David. Well, the word there is I have, or the root word there is I have. And so that is where we get the word for love, ahava. And so that's the word there. Okay. And then if you go to the what how they describe homosexual relationships, remember when we were in the book of Judges, and the Levite from Bethlehem had his concubine with him, and they got as far as Gibeah, and then the men of Gibeah were calling out. They wanted to bring the Levi out and uh, have relations with him, and to know him. The root there is the word yada, and basically that's what they were um, trying to say, is that they just wanted to have sexual relations with not the concubine, but with Levi. So with the Levite. Um, so that's the word that is used for that. whereas the word for love that is used for Jonathan and David was the more pure kind that would not, it would be more like uh, in the Greek, it would be what the philia or whatever. Like, the word we get Philadelphia from, the brotherly love. And so that's the kind of relationship that phileo. Okay, thank you. And that's the relationship that they had. It was just, thinking about. I was trying to think of it today. How would that relationship, if you had, say, for myself, um, as a 50-year-old, where would what kind of, a friend, a young 20-year-old, a kid in college or something would be, you hate to use the word soulmate because that connotates, more like a male-female relationship, but someone that shares your types of aspirations for the country or something, and yeah, it could be a mentor relationship, something like that. But those are very rare. That kind of a relationship was very rare, and so we know that Jonathan, then he said, it cut a covenant with David, and so for him to do that, Jonathan was the crown prince, David was a nothing. So they would not have had a covenant together as a bilateral covenant. This would have been something that Jonathan, a unilateral covenant, that Jonathan is telling David and the world and everything how much he appreciates and cares for David. And so that would have been how that covenant went. And so the idea then that he gave his royal clothing to David, that's one of the highest honors that was given to people back in those days. If you remember the story of Esther, where the king wanted to honor Mordecai, and Haman was. He asked Haman, "What would you do for a guy that I wanted to honor?" And Haman, thinking it was himself, he would say, "Well, I would put your royal robe on his shoulders and a crown on his head and so forth." And so that was basically the highest honor that you could give somebody. More, it's kind of like today, Congressional Medal of Honor plus more. So anyway, that's what he did. He took off his royal robe and he gave it to David along with his armor. And remember, at one point, 30 years previous to that, Jonathan and Saul were the only two that had real proper weapons. They actually had swords, and so he's giving this to David there. And so the giving of the weapons and the armor could have been, we don't know, but it could have been a pledge of loyalty to David on the political scale. And so fortunately, they never had to test that out. Unfortunately, 10 years later, Jonathan dies in battle. So, all right, any comments or questions so far as to how, where we've gotten on this? Are there any comments or at all? Anything?
It's very interesting to know their age difference, because you're right, in all the recounts of that story, they are just two skinny kids out in a field shooting bows and arrows together. And, historically, if that's not accurate, it paints a completely different picture to see Jonathan as a father figure, really, for David. I think that's extremely interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it does shed a whole new light on how that relationship would have been, and just one that makes it even more incredible that it wasn't David who was pledging his all to Jonathan. It was Jonathan, the elder person, pledging his friendship and loyalty to David, who was actually his competitor for the throne. Just, the um, character of Jonathan here really shines through. So, before I leave that, there's one last thing as far as people that talk about this being a rainbow relationship here. Um, the the Bible was not shy in pointing out the foibles of David. Here he was. He was a philanderer. In some cases, he was a murderer. Um, he just did he did some pretty despicable things, and and it told about it. The Bible was not shy at all in telling about that, and so we know from the Bible that uh, the type of behavior there. It was not acceptable then. It's not acceptable today. It's never been acceptable. And so um, one would think that, okay, if David did participate in something like this, the Bible would have recorded it, and it did not. Even though it did record him being a murderer, uh, a cheat, all the different things that he did, but he did all those things, and yet he repented. God called him a man after my own heart. So anyway, let's go ahead. Enough of that. And although the idea that the one word that they use in Hebrew that described the rainbow relationship there was the yada or yada, and so that kind of sheds another little light or another little deal on if you ever watched, I think it was Friends, wasn't it, where or Seinfeld, maybe it's Seinfeld, where the guy was always saying he's telling a story, then yada yada yada, as far as maybe someone just blah 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 talking or something like that. So one of those two shows. I don't remember, but it's funny how languages kind of will mess you up sometimes. All right, so going on with this, we see that last verse there where David was seen as a warrior, and Saul put him into battle. He had put him in there, and God was with him the whole time, and he was always successful. And so, just every time that Saul would do something to maybe get David killed, well, David would come through just smelling like roses, and he would be successful with everything. And so, um, let's go ahead with these other verses here. It says, upon their coming back, upon David's return from killing the Philistines, the women came out of all the towns of Israel, singing and dancing in circles to greet King Saul with timbrels, with joy, and three-stringed instruments. So the the women sang one to another as they were dancing, saying, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. When then Saul became very angry and saying that this saying was evil in his eyes, and he commented, they've ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they describe thousands. Now what more does he lack but the kingdom? So Saul eyed David from that day on. Saul really looked at David as his competitor, the one that was going to take his throne away from him. And so the on these verses here where it's talking about on coming back. All right, and it says from killing the Philistine. Actually, that should be Philistines, and because let's face it, if this had only been coming back from killing Goliath, then where would it have been that these people would be saying, well, David has killed his 10,000, Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s, because they didn't have that kind of a slaughter that day. And so it had to have been that they were coming back from the completion of another successful war, battle, campaign, whatever, against the Philistine army. And so these ladies would get around and dance in a circle around Saul, and they would sing while they're doing this. They're talking about Saul. He killed 1,000, and then talked about David. But David killed 10,000, and so yeah, Paul was somewhat triggered, and he he was one that he was already kind of, he was a little not balanced there. And so that, he was, from that day on, he was going to be targeting David because he viewed him as a threat. And so we already know that this Saul was very jealous, and so these songs would have just set him off even more. So going on with this next verse, it came about the next day that an evil spirit from God came mightily upon Saul, so that he was raving within the palace while David was playing music with his hand, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand. All right, now the idea here that the next day, I don't know. Okay, was it the next day? Okay, fine, it could be the next day. An evil spirit from God. Now that's the part right there. An evil spirit from God. Anybody got an idea or two about this evil spirit from God? Can an evil spirit come from God? Somebody want to tackle that?
I think God an evil spirit to intervene in a person's life. I don't know that an evil spirit would come from God directly.
There's probably enough of them bouncing around out there that all he would have to do is just withdraw his protection, and the evil spirits would come swooping in. Justin, you had a comment.
I was thinking, this kind of makes me think of the story of Job at the very beginning of it, when it's like the devil's like, when Satan's like talking to God, and asking him about what, or telling him that he's the only reason he follows you, kind of thing. And so I kind of feel like God grants the permission for these things to happen. It's not so much that this evil spirit is a derivative of God necessarily, but that God's allowing this evil spirit to torment him for a reason, or to, he's allowing this evil spirit to come upon him. And I mean, when you think of saying from God, God at the end of, I would think, God at the end of the day created all things. So, I mean, an evil spirit, don't know that it would come from God, but maybe it's another one of those fallen spirits that chose to rebel against God.
Yeah, could very well be. All right,
a lot of thoughts there. I'm not sure if one's right, but that's what makes sense to me.
Sure. Okay.
So I've got two thoughts on that. Two places where the specific individual absolutely had to play out their role in an evil kind of way would be Pharaoh with Moses and Judas with Yeshua. They both had roles to play in order for the epic story to actually come about the way it's supposed to. And for the choreography that God had planned to spin around and spin around until it landed on the right spot.
Okay. And I think that's, yeah, I think a lot of us, all of us are very reluctant to ascribe to God that he would actually put on an evil spirit on someone. And probably he just doesn't have to. Just doesn't have to. I mean, it's if you leave that vacuum, it's going to come right on in. So, all right, good. Anything else? Okay. Then this evil spirit, however it was, now that evil spirit, what was it? It would bear a remarkable resemblance to, like a paranoid schizophrenic, maybe something like that. And just, or what is that? There's another term that has just popped up, and I can never remember it. That where he what is the deal where I keep wanting to say ACDC. No, not ACDC. It's where you're good 1 minute and then just the next second you're off in the other direction. What's
Bipolar.
Bipolar? Why can't I ever remember bipolar? Goodness sake, that's the one. It's not ACDC. All right, we already talked about ACDC. But bipolar, he could have been like that, a bipolar kind of a guy that just went off on things. But it was nevertheless, I think, a punishment inflicted by God himself upon a wicked Saul. Remember, Saul was given all of the advantage. He was given everything. And so then he just squandered it. He didn't he didn't actually live like God wanted him to do and be the righteous king that he wanted, that God wanted him to be. And so when he kept disobeying God and doing things his own way rather than doing what God had him told him to do, then he said, okay, we're going to have to do a little bit of disciplining here. And perhaps that was a discipline of some sort that could Saul have come back from that? We don't know. We don't know. But it was definitely something that God allowed, if not actually, inflicted him with some unstable thing in his mind. And so there was, it was enough that it would turn him into the king that loved David, to the jealous despot that desperately wanted to shish kebab David. So notice that that at this point there was not a war going on in progress. So that kind of gives a little bit of support to that the celebration where the women were out there. Saul has killed his 1,000 and David has killed his 10,000. That came at the end of a very important phase in a Philistine war. That just whooped up on them, and they were having a period of peace now. So Saul's envy, of course, ended up in him trying to kill David with his spear. And so instead, then, I don't understand all of this, but instead of just David bailing out on him and being gone, he agreed and he went from the palace to the battlefield. And so Saul was thinking, well, if I can get him out there on the battlefield, maybe I can, he'll get killed, because battlefields are pretty dangerous places sometimes. So I don't know if you've ever read much of H.G. Wells, but he said he had a character one time in one of his books that was Mr. Polly, and he described him as he was not so much a human. He was not so much a human being as a civil war. And so I think that kind of describes Saul, that he was a living civil war. He was miserable. He possessed of an evil spirit. He was, had mental conditions maybe. He was suspicious, angry, jealous. And so, um, that would describe Saul pretty much, that he was a living civil war. And as a result of that, then he struck out against, he tried to kill maybe the most loyal and trustworthy guy in his whole camp, and that would have been David. Any comments there? All right. Now, as a warrior, David excelled. Every time Saul would put him into to go into battle and so forth, David would come out just unscathed, and with lots of booty, and so they talk about the coming in and going out, where he went in to the people and out and so forth. That is basically where he says he's going out on these military sorties, and then he's coming back totally victorious, and just won everything. So the success of David was really a product of God's favor, and so I think that's what you would have to say, that everything that David did, it was good and it was perfect, and at this point in his life, okay, and God blessed him with all of his activities. So then David, let's go ahead. Saul, he removed him from his entourage by appointing him as a captain of 1,000, and so David would go into battle, and he was always won. And so then he sent him out of the palace to go to battles, just mostly to get rid of him. And so at that point, all right, so Saul is kind of out of, he's got David kind of out of the loop. He's out on the battlefield, so it really wouldn't be something that it wouldn't be something that they could use or make him so popular that he would be a threat to Saul. So probably a good move on Saul's part politically. And then that way also people wouldn't think of him as being crazy man for trying to kill his guitar player. And so that's just the where they were at that point. And remember now, David had been promised Saul's daughter if he killed Goliath. That was the deal, that he would get Saul's daughter, and maybe that's what they were talking about. The idea of, okay, who am I going to give my daughter to? Am I going to give it to this redheaded kid or not? So basically, what happened then was that David or Saul, promised his daughter, and then before he could give it to her or whatever, he went ahead and gave the daughter away to somebody else, and maybe someone who was more politically connected or something like that. So then at that point, the relationship between Saul and David is already pretty rotten, I guess. But David shook it off, and he says, well, look, I mean, who am I? I'm just a poor boy, and I'm not real sure why I would warrant or why I would rate getting the king's daughter and becoming the king's son-in-law. And so that's kind of where it went. And then Saul was thinking, okay, look, if I can kind of keep an eye on him like that and have one of my girls to spy on him, keep track of him, then I would know his moves, and then I could counter that. And so he had already given. He said he was going to give Merab to David for killing Goliath, but then it didn't happen. He gave her away. So as it turned out, number two sister really liked David. She just thought he was the greatest thing, with the little red curly hair and maybe some freckles across his nose, and oh, he was just really, really a good guy in her eyes. And so Saul says, you know what, I can use this to my advantage. And so he says, well, I'll give you Michal and Michael. And so David said, well, no, look, I'm just a nothing. You're a king and I'm a nothing. How can that be? And so the servants got involved back and forth, and there was a lot of palace intrigue and, talking over here and over there, they're talking back and forth. And you can just imagine a bunch of people out there trying to play matchmaker for David and Michal, the daughter of Saul. So anyway, David, probably mentioned, well, I don't even have anything to give her. And Saul said, oh, I'll give you something easy. The dowry will be very, very easy. You just got to go bring me the foreskins of 100 Philistines. Well, that's kind of a problem in that the Philistines probably would not want to part with that piece of equipment. And so to do that, they would have had to kill him. Well, that was the idea. Somebody's trying to kill you, then you're going to try to kill them back. And so there was Saul's. That's what he was trying to do. He was trying to get David killed by the Philistines because, when it got known out there that that's what David was going to do, all of the Philistines, they would just go, ooh, and decide that, we need to fight a little bit harder and let's kill this guy. And so it didn't happen. David doubled down and he brought 200 foreskins. Now, all right, just the picture of that, and how did they do that? Well, actually, mutilation of the bodies of your enemies was pretty common back in those days. So I mean, it was just not that big a deal that okay, so the idea of going and killing these guys and then doing the surgery on them afterwards, not an unusual thing. Okay, and so this is what he did. He went, instead of getting 100 Philistines, he went ahead and killed 200 and brought them all back. And what did you bring them back in? I don't know. Would he brought it back in a tip bag? I don't know. But he brought them back, laid them out there, and said, "Okay, here you go." So now Saul had no choice, but all right, I'm going to have to give him to Michal, but that's okay because now she'll be my spy, and she can tell me. Well, that didn't work out very well either because Michal kind of liked David. In fact, she loved him, and so every time that Saul would try to do something against David, it would just come up. David would be popular, even more popular than ever before. And so he'd be sent out into war, impossible odds. The next thing you know, David is coming back home with, okay, here's some more trophies for you, King Saul. We were successful. And just, the dancing girls around, jumping around circles and everything. And again, were they talking about Saul and his 1,000 and David and his 10,000? Probably not, because word probably got out to the populace that say, hey, Saul doesn't like that. Okay, so they probably, they backed off from that. Saul and his advisor had made them an offer they couldn't refuse. So don't be singing that song anymore. But every time that Saul would send David out into the battlefield, or wherever it was that he was going, David came back with just even more than what what they had before. So he became much more popular. He was just not a loser. Everything that he did was successful. I mean, he just couldn't fail. And that made Saul even more and more angry. And so here we're gonna go